My name is Jordan Sterling and I am 34 years old. By day, I am a partner at one of the city's most formidable criminal defense firms, a job my family refers to with a curled lip as being a shark. They never expected that one day they would be the ones bleeding in the water, begging that same shark to save them from being devoured. And they certainly never expected that my fee wouldn't be a single dollar, but something far more costly: their pride. Before I dive into the story of how my brother's ruin became my vindication, and how I finally collected on a debt decades in the making, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever felt like the black sheep of your family, go ahead and hit that like button, and consider subscribing to join a community of people who know exactly what it feels like to be underestimated. The air in my parents' dining room was always thick with the cloying scent of pot roast and unspoken resentments. It was a scent I had come to associate with suffocation. Tonight, for my father's 65th birthday, it was particularly dense. I sat at the polished mahogany table, a ghost in a tailored silk blouse, my presence tolerated but not truly welcomed. My glass of Cabernet was a shield, something to hold, something to swirl, a focal point to avoid the casual dismissiveness in my mother's eyes. Across from me sat my brother Ethan, the sun around which our familial solar system revolved. He was recounting a story about his nonprofit, Harvest for Hope, which distributed organic produce to underserved communities. His hands, perpetually dusted with the good earth, gestured earnestly as he spoke of heirloom tomatoes and the smiling faces of children. "And the grant from the Henderson Foundation just came through," he announced, his face glowing with a wholesome, beatific light. "It means we can open the second community garden downtown. Full funding for the next 3 years." My mother, Helen, reached across the table to squeeze his hand, her eyes welling with tears of pride. "Oh, Ethan, that's just wonderful. You do such important work. Truly, you're a blessing to this city." My father, Richard, beamed, raising his own glass. "To Ethan, a son who makes a real difference in the world. Building things, helping people. We're so proud of you." The toast was made. Glasses clinked. Mine remained on the table. The omission was a familiar pang, a dull ache I had learned to live with. I took a slow sip of my wine, the tannins a bitter counterpoint to the sweetness of the scene. They never toasted my victories. When I made partner at 31, the youngest in my firm's history, my father had grunted and said, "Well, I suppose someone has to defend the guilty." When I won an impossible case freeing a man railroaded by a flawed system, my mother had sighed and whispered, "I just pray you can sleep at night, Jordan." All that negativity. "And how about you, Jordan?" my mother asked, her tone shifting from warm sunshine to polite chilly shade. It was the obligatory question, the perfunctory nod in my direction. "Still busy getting criminals back on the streets?" I forced a small, tight smile. It was a muscle I had exercised to perfection over the years. "Business is good, Mom. The justice system is always busy." I kept my voice level, professional. It was my armor. Emotion was a weakness in this house, unless it was the acceptable emotion of fawning over Ethan. "I just don't know how you do it," she continued, shaking her head with a delicate shudder, as if shedding something unclean. "All that avarice. Arguing for people you know have done terrible things. To feel so cynical." "Everyone deserves a defense, Helen," my father chimed in, using his stern paternal voice, the one that signaled the end of a discussion he found distasteful. "It's a cornerstone of our democracy. Even if the profession itself can be morally bankrupt." He looked at me, his gaze a mixture of disappointment and pity. It was a look that said, "You could have been so much more. You could have been like your brother." Ethan, bless his heart, tried to mediate as he always did. He was a good man, just one blinded by the constant, unwavering light of our parents' approval. "Now, Mom, Dad. Jordan is the best at what she does. Her clients are lucky to have her." He offered me a small, apologetic smile, the kind one gives a stray dog you can't bring home. It was meant to be kind, but it only highlighted the chasm between us. He was defending my character, not my profession. To them, the two were inextricably, damnably linked. "It's not about being the best, Ethan," Richard corrected gently. "It's about what you choose to be best at. You chose to serve others. Jordan chose. Well, she chose to serve herself." The words landed like stones. I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks, the angry tremor in my hands that I quickly stilled by placing them in my lap. Serve myself. They saw my grueling hours, the endless nights poring over case law, the emotional toll of holding a person's life in my hands, and they distilled it all down to greed. They saw my six-figure salary, my sharp suits, my downtown apartment, and they saw it not as the fruit of relentless effort and a razor-sharp intellect, but as the wages of sin. They had paid for every cent of Ethan's political science degree and his master's in nonprofit management. They'd given him the seed money to start Harvest for Hope, calling it an investment in humanity. When I had asked for help with my law school tuition, a fraction of what they had given him, they had refused. I remembered the conversation as if it were yesterday, standing in this very same dining room, the application to Georgetown clutched in my hand. "Jordan, this is a path of conflict and money chasing," my father had said, his voice laced with a weary finality. "It's a selfish path. We're not going to finance that. If you want to go down that road, you'll go down it alone." And so I did. I took out staggering loans. I worked 3 jobs, waiting tables, tutoring undergraduates, and shelving books in the law library until my eyes burned. I lived on instant noodles and cheap coffee. I graduated top of my class, exhausted but forged in a fire of my own making. I had built my life, my career, my success without a single brick from them. And all they could see was a monument to a choice they disapproved of. "I should get going," I said, folding my napkin and placing it beside my plate. The pot roast was still half-eaten. I had lost my appetite. "I have an early meeting tomorrow." "Always busy with meetings," my mother sighed, not with pride, but with a kind of pitying resignation. "Don't you ever just live, dear?" "This isn't living," I wanted to scream. This meticulously constructed life of mine? This success I bled for? But I didn't. I just smiled that tight, professional smile again. "Happy birthday, Dad." I leaned in to kiss his cheek. He accepted it stiffly, his skin smelling of soap and subtle disapproval. I nodded at my mother and gave Ethan's shoulder a quick squeeze. "Congratulations on the grant, Ethan. That's really fantastic." "Thanks, Geordie," he said, his smile genuine and uncomplicated. "Drive safe, okay?" As I walked out into the cool night air, the heavy scent of the house finally lifted from my clothes. I got into my car, a sleek black German sedan that they despised, and gripped the leather steering wheel until my knuckles were white. The silence of the car was a balm. I didn't turn on the radio. I just sat there in the dark, letting the waves of anger and hurt wash over me. It was a familiar ritual. I would allow myself the pain for the duration of the drive home, and then I would lock it away in the same ironclad vault where I kept the details of my most harrowing cases. By the time I walked into my apartment, I would be Jordan Sterling, attorney at law again. Ambitious. Untouchable. The shark they imagined me to be. It was an identity born of their rejection, and a persona I had learned to wear as comfortably as my own skin. But some nights like tonight it felt less like armor and more like a cage. I started the engine, the quiet purr a stark contrast to the turmoil in my chest, and drove away from the warm glow of the family home, back toward the cold, clear skyline of my own world. A world they could never understand and would soon desperately need. The call came 2 weeks later. It was a Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of a deposition, systematically dismantling the testimony of a smug corporate executive who thought he could outsmart me. My paralegal, Anya, slipped a note in front of me. It was a single sentence written in her neat, urgent script. Your mother on line 1. Says it's an emergency. I felt a lurch, not of concern but of irritation. An emergency in my mother's world was usually a malfunctioning dishwasher or a disagreement with the garden club president. "Ask her what it's regarding," I mouthed to Anya, holding up a finger to the opposing counsel. Anya spoke quietly into her headset and then wrote another note. She says it's about Ethan. He's been arrested. The world tilted slightly on its axis. The smug executive across the table seemed to blur at the edges. Ethan. Arrested. The two words didn't belong in the same universe. It was like saying the sun had been arrested for being too bright. "Take a 15-minute recess," I announced, my voice a flat, steady thing that betrayed none of the sudden chaos in my mind. I stood up, walked out of the conference room and went straight to my office, closing the door behind me. I picked up the receiver, my hand surprisingly steady. "Mom, what's going on?" Her voice was a frantic, high-pitched sob. "Jordan, Oh, thank God. It's Ethan. They took him. The police, they just came to the office and took him away in handcuffs. Can you imagine? Handcuffs. I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers against the bridge of my nose. I needed facts, not hysterics. Mom, slow down. What was he arrested for? What did they say? Fraud. Embezzlement. Something ridiculous. They're saying he stole money from the nonprofit. From Harvest for Hope. It's a lie, Jordan, a terrible, vicious lie. You know Ethan. He wouldn't steal a paperclip. Of course he wouldn't. If there was one thing I knew with absolute certainty, it was that my brother was pathologically honest. He was the kind of person who would run a block to return a nickel to a stranger. Greed was not in his DNA, which meant something was very, very wrong. Where is he now? The downtown precinct. Your father is there now. He hired a lawyer. A man from our church, Arthur Finch. A very respectable man. Arthur Finch. I knew the name. He was a decent estate planner, a man you hired to draft a will or handle a property dispute. He was a kindly old golden retriever. And they had just sent him into a shark tank. Mom, what is his bail? They haven't said it yet. They're calling him a flight risk. They're talking about millions of dollars, Jordan. Millions. It's all a mistake, it has to be. Millions. The word echoed in the quiet of my office. This wasn't a simple accounting error. This was serious. This was federal-level white-collar crime. Okay, listen to me, I said, my voice slipping into the calm, authoritative tone I used with panicked clients. Tell Dad not to let Arthur Finch say anything. Don't let Ethan answer any questions without counsel. And by counsel I mean competent counsel. I'm on my way. You'll help then. Her voice was small, filled with a desperate, trembling hope. It was a sound I had never heard from her before. I'm coming to find out what's going on, I said non-committally. I hung up the phone before she could start crying again. I told Anya to reschedule the rest of the deposition, citing a family emergency. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I spent the next 48 hours in a blur of frantic activity, not for them but for myself. I couldn't stand the not knowing. I called in favors. I got a copy of the initial charging documents and the probable cause affidavit. I read them in my office late at night, the city lights twinkling below like a galaxy of indifferent stars. What I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't a mistake. It was a masterpiece. The evidence was damning, meticulously constructed, and almost beautiful in its lethality. There were wire transfers, routed through a complex web of shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands, that eventually ended up in a personal bank account under a name that was a slight variation of Ethan's. There were forged digital signatures on documents authorizing the transfers, authenticated with security protocols that seemed on the surface to be legitimate. There were emails, seemingly from Ethan's account, discussing the transactions in coded language. It was an intricate, airtight frame job, designed by someone with a sophisticated understanding of both finance and technology. Arthur Finch wouldn't have known where to even begin. He would have advised a plea bargain and my innocent, naive brother would have been swallowed whole by the system. My parents, meanwhile, were operating in a state of righteous denial. They were convinced it was all a bureaucratic misunderstanding that would be cleared up in a day or two. They hired Arthur Finch because he was a man of integrity, not a hired gun like me. They wanted someone who would politely point out the error of the government's ways. I met them at a coffee shop near the courthouse. My father looked aged, his usual robust confidence deflated. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. Arthur Finch sat with them, looking hopelessly out of his depth, a folder of papers clutched in his wrinkly hands. It's a strong case, I'm afraid, Arthur said, his voice quavering slightly. The paper trail is extensive. The U.S. Attorney's Office is not known for making these kinds of mistakes. But it is a mistake. Helen insisted, her voice rising. Ethan is a good boy. He builds gardens. I slid the file I had prepared across the table. It's not a mistake, it's a setup. And Arthur, no offense, but you're about to get your client buried. Richard bristled. Jordan, show some respect. Mr. Finch is doing his best. His best isn't good enough, I shot back, my patience worn thin. The person who did this is a professional. They used layered encryption on the emails and spoofed the IP address to make it look like it came from Ethan's laptop. The wire transfers were routed through 6 different offshore accounts in 3 different countries before landing in the final account. This isn't fraud, it's financial warfare. You need a warrior, not a deacon. They stared at me, their faces a mixture of confusion and a dawning, terrifying understanding. The technical jargon was over their heads, but the menace in my tone was crystal clear. The prosecutor they've assigned is a woman named Maria Flores, I continued, pressing the advantage. They call her the Bulldog. She has a 98% conviction rate on white-collar cases. She's going to eat Arthur alive, and she's going to ask for a sentence of 20 to 25 years. Ethan will be in his 60s when he gets out. The color drained from my mother's face. My father's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. For the first time, the reality of the situation seemed to penetrate their bubble of self-righteous belief. Their golden child wasn't just in trouble. He was on the verge of being erased. What do you suggest we do? My father asked, the words sounding like they were being dragged from his throat. I leaned back in my chair, my expression unreadable. Right now. Nothing. You've made it clear how you feel about my profession. You hired your man of integrity. Let's see what his integrity is worth against a federal indictment. I stood up, leaving my own coffee untouched. Call me when you're serious. I walked away, leaving them stewing in their fear and their pride. It was a cruel move, and a part of me felt a twinge of guilt. But a larger part of me, the part that remembered every slight, every dismissal, every bit of casual condescension, knew it was necessary. They had to understand the value of the very thing they had spent my entire life condemning. They had to come to me. Not because I was family, but because I was the best. Because I was a shark. And their son was drowning. The call came 4 days later. 4 days during which Ethan's bail was set at an astronomical $2 million, an amount they couldn't possibly raise without liquidating every asset they owned. 4 days during which Arthur Finch fumbled his way through a preliminary hearing, looking like a lost tourist in a foreign land. 4 days during which the local news picked up the story, splashing Ethan's face across the screen with the headline, "Charity Founder Accused of $1 Million Betrayal." The wholesome nonprofit, my parents' pride and joy, was now a symbol of public corruption. Its reputation was in ashes. My phone rang just after 10 at night. I was in my apartment looking out at the city, a glass of whiskey in my hand. It was my father. His voice was stripped of all its usual bluster. It was the voice of a defeated man. "Jordan, we need to talk." "I'm listening," I said, my voice cool and even. There was a long pause, filled with the sound of his ragged breathing. "Finch is recommending a plea. He says they'll reduce the sentence to 8 years if Ethan pleads guilty. And save the government the cost of a trial," I finished for him. "It's a standard move for an outmatched attorney. He's terrified. Ethan won't do it. He refuses to admit to something he didn't do. He's not built for this, Jordan. He's falling apart." His voice cracked on the last few words. It was the first time in my life I had ever heard my father sound truly broken. "I see," I said. I let the silence stretch, a vast empty space that I knew he was desperate for me to fill with reassurance, with a plan, with a promise. I offered him none of it. "We were wrong," he finally choked out. We need you. We need your help." The words were a concession, a surrender. But it wasn't enough. "Not yet. My help is not cheap, Dad. We'll pay you anything," he said, the desperation raw and undisguised. "We'll liquidate the house, the retirement funds. Whatever it takes." I took a slow sip of my whiskey, the amber liquid burning a trail down my throat. "I don't want your money." He was confused. "What? I don't understand. What do you want then?" "I want you and Mom to come to my office. Tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock sharp. We'll discuss my fee then." I hung up the phone. I knew they would be there. They had no other choice. The balance of power, so firmly tilted in their favor for my entire life, had finally irrevocably shifted. I finished my whiskey, the cold fire in my belly a grim, satisfying warmth. The shark was circling. And tomorrow she would name her price. The next morning they arrived at my firm's downtown office looking small and out of place. The lobby, all glass and steel and minimalist furniture, was a world away from their comfortable suburban life. My father's suit was well made but looked dated against the sharp modern lines of the architecture. My mother clutched her handbag like a life raft, her eyes darting around nervously as if the very air was contaminated with the moral ambiguity she so despised. Anya, ever the professional, showed them into my office with a polite, neutral smile. My office was my sanctuary and my fortress. One wall was a floor-to-ceiling window with a panoramic view of the city and the bay beyond. The opposite wall was lined with law books, a testament to the knowledge I had fought so hard to acquire. My desk was a large, imposing slab of dark mahogany, clear of all clutter except for my laptop and a single pristine legal pad. I had deliberately chosen this room for its power. I wanted them to feel it. I wanted them to understand the world I commanded. They sat in the 2 leather chairs opposite my desk, looking like supplicants before a queen. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, watching them squirm. My mother twisted the strap of her purse. My father stared at a spot on my carpet, unable to meet my gaze. "Thank you for coming," I began, my voice calm and measured. It was the same voice I used at the beginning of a high-stakes negotiation. It was designed to project absolute control. "Jordan, please," my mother whispered, her voice trembling. "We know we haven't always understood your choices. But he's your brother. He's our son. You can't let this happen to him." I steepled my fingers, my gaze unwavering. What is happening to him is a direct result of a calculated and malicious attack. The person who framed him is not only intelligent, but they know the inner workings of Harvest for Hope intimately. To beat this, to even have a chance, requires a defense that is equally, if not more, aggressive, intelligent, and relentless. It requires complete immersion. It will mean putting every other case I have on hold. It will mean living and breathing this for months. It will mean fighting a battle against a federal prosecutor who does not lose. "We understand," my father said, finally looking up. His eyes were bloodshot. "And we told you we will pay you whatever you ask." I gave a small, humorless smile. "You think this is about money? That's always been your mistake when it comes to me. You think I do this for money?" I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a lower, more intense register. "I do this to win. I do this because I believe in the principle of a rigorous defense. I do this because I am good at it. You have spent my entire adult life condemning the very essence of who I am and what I do. You called my ambition greed. You called my skills morally bankrupt. You held up my brother as a paragon of virtue, a man who builds, while I was the cynical destroyer who serves herself." The color rose in their faces. They had the decency to look ashamed, but I wasn't finished. "Now the wholesome world you built for your perfect son has crumbled. And you've come to the shark, the mercenary, the daughter you were ashamed of, to save him. You want me to unleash the very parts of my character you found so distasteful. You want me to be ruthless. You want me to be aggressive. You want me to use every trick, every bit of knowledge I have, to tear down the prosecution's case. You want me to be the shark. So I will." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle in the silent room. "But my fee, as I said, is not money. You couldn't afford my actual price in dollars, and frankly, your money is an insult to me. It has always been a tool you used to measure worth, and by your own metric you found me wanting. So no, I don't want your money." "Then what, Jordan?" my father asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What is your price?" I leaned back in my chair, my expression unyielding. "My price is an apology." They stared at me, bewildered. "An apology?" my mother repeated. "Of course we're sorry, Jordan. We're so sorry for everything." "No," I cut her off, my voice sharp as glass. "Not a panicked, desperate apology whispered in the privacy of my office. Not a means to an end. I want a real one. A permanent one." I slid the pristine legal pad and a heavy fountain pen across the desk towards them. "I want a full, public written apology. From both of you. And from Ethan once he is free. It will be addressed to me. It will detail specifically how you have belittled my professional choices, how you have consistently undervalued my achievements while glorifying my brothers, and how you were wrong to do so. It will acknowledge the pain and alienation your actions have caused. It will state unequivocally that you recognize the value and integrity of my work. And it will be published in the city paper as a full-page letter to the community. You built your family's reputation on the foundation of your son's perceived virtue and my perceived amorality. Now you will publicly correct the record." A stunned, horrified silence filled the room. My mother looked as if I had physically struck her. My father's face went from pale to a deep, mottled red. That's That's monstrous, he sputtered, finding his voice. You want to publicly humiliate us? Your own parents. Humiliate you? I asked, my voice dangerously soft. You mean like you did to me, every single time you dismissed my career at a family dinner? Like you did when you told a 15-year-old girl her ambition was selfish? Like you did when you refused to help me with my education but proudly funded my brother's every venture? You are confusing humiliation with accountability. I'm not asking for anything that is not true. You will write the truth. And you will sign your names to it. Jordan, you can't be serious, my mother pleaded, tears now streaming down her face. This is blackmail. This is cruel. It is not blackmail, I stated calmly. It is my fee. The terms are non-negotiable. You want me to save your son? You will pay the price. The price is the truth. A truth you have denied for 20 years. I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. You have 24 hours to decide. If I don't have your agreement by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, you can find another lawyer. I hear Arthur Finch is available. I walked to the door and held it open for them. They stumbled out, shell-shocked and silent. As they left, I saw the conflict warring in their eyes. Their fierce, protective love for my brother and their deep, ingrained pride. For the first time, those two things were in direct opposition. They could save one or they could save the other. They could not save both. I closed the door, the soft click echoing in the vast, quiet office. I did not know what they would choose. But I knew that, either way, I had already won something back for myself. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I tried to work, but my focus was shattered. I kept replaying the scene in my office, the shock on their faces, the venom in my own voice. Was I being cruel? Was I using my brother's crisis as leverage for my own petty revenge? The thought gnawed at me. But then I would remember the sting of a dozen casual insults, the coldness in their eyes, the profound loneliness of my own graduation day, and the doubt would recede, replaced by a hard, cold certainty. This wasn't petty. This was about tectonic plates of family dynamics shifting. It was about reclaiming a narrative that had been written for me by others. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. A different kind of justice than I usually sought, but justice nonetheless. At 9:58 a.m. the next morning, my desk phone rang. It was my father. I let it ring 3 times before I picked it up. Jordan, he said. There was no preamble. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It was the sound of utter defeat. We agreed to your terms. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, a silent, shuddering breath escaping my lips. Good, I said, my own voice betraying nothing. I'm clearing my schedule. I'll be filing a motion to be named as lead counsel this afternoon. I'll need you to fire Arthur Finch immediately. Send me all the files he has, however useless they may be. I'll be at the detention center to meet with my client at 2 o'clock. All right, he said. Just that one word. And Dad, I added just before he could hang up. Don't start drafting that apology just yet. You won't know what to write until you see what I can do. I want you to understand fully what you are apologizing for. I hung up the phone and stared out the window. The city looked sharp and clear, the details vivid. A weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had lifted. The war had just begun, but I had already won the first, most important battle. My first meeting with Ethan was in a small, sterile, windowless room at the Federal Detention Center. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, his skin was sallow, and his eyes, usually so bright and optimistic, were shadowed with fear and despair. He was wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit that seemed to swallow him whole. The golden child was gone, replaced by a terrified inmate. Jordy, he breathed, his voice hoarse when I walked in. He tried to stand, but his legs seemed to tremble. Sit down, Ethan, I said, my voice softer than it had been with our parents. I placed my briefcase on the small metal table and sat opposite him. How are you holding up? He gave a weak, broken laugh. How do you think? They think I'm some kind of monster. Grief. Everyone I ever tried to help, all the people who believed in me, they all think I betrayed them. That's what the person who did this to you wants them to think, I said, opening my briefcase and pulling out a legal pad. But you and I know the truth. And my job is to make sure a jury knows it too. He looked at me, a flicker of the old Ethan shining through the fear. Dad told me about your fee. He looked down at his hands chained at his waist. I don't blame you, Jordy. Not one bit. They were wrong. I was wrong. I stood by and let them do it. I bathed in their approval and never once thought about how cold it must have been for you standing in the shade. When this is over, whatever you want me to write, I'll write it. I'll sign my name to it 100 times. His sincerity was a sharp, unexpected blow to my carefully constructed armor. My anger had been a shield, a weapon. It was easy to wield against my parents' prideful denial. But against my brother's simple, humble contrition, it faltered. For a fleeting moment I saw not just the golden child but my little brother, the boy I used to build forts with in the living room before the world had taught us our designated roles. I cleared my throat, pushing the emotion down. I had to be his lawyer now, not his sister. We'll talk about that later. Right now I need you to tell me everything. Every project, every employee, every donor, every board member at Harvest for Hope. I want to know about anyone who had access, anyone with a grudge, anyone who seemed too good to be true. The person who framed you is hiding in the details. We need to find them. For the next 3 hours he talked and I listened, my pen flying across the page. I didn't just ask about enemies, I asked about friends. I asked about finances, about recent hires, about security protocols for the Foundation's servers. A picture began to emerge, not of a crime, but of a system ripe for exploitation. Ethan, with his trusting nature, had run his nonprofit like a large, happy family. He had given too much access to too many people, believing in the inherent goodness of their shared mission. He had been naive. And someone had used that naivete as a weapon against him. One name kept coming up. Marcus Thorne. A newish board member, a retired investment banker who had joined about a year ago. He had been a godsend, according to Ethan. He had streamlined their financial processes, modernized their digital security, and personally secured several large donations. He was charismatic, brilliant, and deeply committed to the cause. He was also the one who had first pointed out some minor accounting discrepancies to Ethan, suggesting they hire an outside auditor to get ahead of any potential issues. It was a move that, in retrospect, looked less like due diligence and more like a predator laying its own tracks. Marcus was a genius, Ethan said, his voice full of a now bitter admiration. He restructured everything. He said our old system was too vulnerable. He set up all the new encryption, the new servers. My pen stopped moving. He set up the new servers himself? Yes. He said it would save the Foundation a fortune in consulting fees. He was always looking for ways to save us money. A cold dread, mingled with the thrill of the hunt, washed over me. Ethan, I said, my voice low and urgent. Did Marcus have administrative access to those servers? Ethan's face went pale. Yes. Of course. He was in charge of the entire financial tech infrastructure. I stared at my brother. The brilliant, helpful, charismatic board member who had personally designed the very system that was now being used as evidence against Ethan. The man who had volunteered to build the cage, who held the only key and who was now pointing a finger at the man trapped inside. It was almost too perfect. It was elegant. It was evil. I think, I said slowly, a grim smile touching my lips for the first time that day, we found our ghost. The next 2 months were a descent into a legal and digital inferno. I lived on coffee and 4 hours of sleep a night. My apartment became a war room, the walls covered in flowcharts, financial statements, and timelines. I hired the best digital forensics expert in the country, a quirky genius named Kenji who saw computer code as a form of poetry. Together we began to pick apart the prosecution's airtight case, one thread at a time. We found the first crack in the digital signatures. On the surface they were perfect replicas of Ethan's. But Kenji found something buried deep in the metadata, a digital watermark, almost invisible, that didn't match the authentic signatures from other documents. It was the work of a master forger, but even masters leave a trace. Then we went after the emails. The prosecution claimed they were sent from Ethan's laptop at his home. But by subpoenaing the internet service provider's deep logs, something Arthur Finch would have never thought to do, we discovered that while the IP address had been spoofed to look like Ethan's home, the actual point of origin for the signal was a small anonymous server farm in Romania. A server farm that, with a little more digging, we found was owned by a shell corporation. And that was where we hit the jackpot. The shell corporation in Romania was owned by another in Panama, which was owned by another in Belize. It was a classic Russian nesting doll of corporate obfuscation. But I was relentless. I used every legal tool at my disposal. filing international discovery motions that made my firm's partners' heads spin. I called in favors from contacts I had in international banking law. And finally, after weeks of hitting legal brick walls, we found the final doll. The beneficial owner of the entire chain, the man at the very end of the line, was Marcus Thorne. He had used his old investment banking network to create an untraceable digital infrastructure, a ghost network he could use to commit the crime and then dissolve. He just never imagined anyone would have the skill or the sheer bloody-minded determination to trace it all the way back to him. The final piece of the puzzle was the motive. Why would a wealthy, retired banker frame the head of a charity? I hired a private investigator, a grizzled ex-cop named Sal, to dig into Marcus's life. What Sal found was devastating. Marcus wasn't a retired investment banker. He had been fired. Disgraced. He had lost his entire fortune and his clients in a series of reckless, illegal trades. He was millions of dollars in debt. He hadn't joined Harvest for hope out of altruism. He had joined it to find a new victim. He had been siphoning off donations into his offshore accounts for months, long before he set the frame for Ethan. The frame-up wasn't just to cover his tracks. It was to create a scapegoat so he could perform one last, massive transfer of funds during the chaos of the arrest and investigation. He had stolen nearly $5 million and he had intended for my brother to rot in prison for it. I had it all. The means, the motive, the opportunity. I had the digital fingerprints and the financial trail. The case against Ethan was a house of cards, and I was holding a hurricane in my briefcase. Throughout this time my parents were a wreck. They called me daily for updates, their voices small and fearful. I kept my reports brief and professional. I did not offer them comfort. I did not tell them about the breakthroughs. I simply said, "We are making progress." I needed them to stay in that place of fear and uncertainty. I needed them to watch the process unfold, to understand the complexity and the darkness they had so blithely dismissed for years. I needed them to see the shark at work. The day the trial began, the courtroom was packed. The media was there in force. My parents and a few loyal friends of Ethan's sat in the front row, their faces pale and drawn. Marcus Thorne was also there, sitting in the back, looking for all the world like a concerned friend and board member, his expression a mask of somber support. He had no idea I knew. He had no idea he was walking into his own execution. Maria Flores, the bulldog, was as formidable as advertised. She laid out her case with brutal efficiency, presenting the wire transfers, the emails, the digital signatures. It was a compelling narrative of greed and betrayal. The jury was captivated. With every piece of evidence she presented, I could feel the hope draining from my parents' faces. They looked at me, their eyes pleading, but I kept my expression neutral, my gaze fixed on the jury, on the judge, on Flores. I let her build her case. I let her construct the gallows. I wanted the fall to be that much higher. When it was my turn, I didn't begin with a grand opening statement. I began quietly. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," I said, walking slowly towards the jury box. "The prosecution has just told you a very good story. It's a simple, clean story of a good man gone bad. And like most simple, clean stories, it is a complete and utter fiction." For the next 3 days I didn't just dismantle her case, I atomized it. I put Kenji, my forensics expert, on the stand. In simple, clear language that the jury could understand, he explained the concept of a digital watermark, showing them on a large screen the subtle forgery in the signatures. He explained how an IP address could be spoofed, and he showed them the server logs from Romania. With every answer, a brick was pulled from the prosecution's wall. Then I called my private investigator, Sal, to the stand. He laid out the story of Marcus Thorne's financial ruin, presenting bank statements and termination letters that documented his disgrace. The jury was now leaning forward, intrigued. This was a new story, a different one. My final witness was a surprise. I called Marcus Thorne to the stand as a hostile witness. Flores objected violently, but the judge, a shrewd old woman named Judge Carmichael, was hooked. She overruled the objection. Marcus had no choice but to take the stand. He swaggered up, confident and smirking. He thought I was a fool. He thought I was just some rich man's daughter playing lawyer. He was about to learn otherwise. I was polite at first. I asked him about his role on the board. I had him describe in his own words how he had so generously volunteered his time to upgrade the foundation's financial security. I had him tell the jury that he and only he had the top-level administrative access to the new system he had built. Then my voice turned to ice. Mr. Thorne, you were an investment banker at Sterling and Finch, were you not? I was, he said, still smiling. You didn't retire, did you, Mr. Thorne? You were fired. Fired for cause for engaging in trades that lost your clients over $50 million. Isn't that correct? His smile vanished. Flores was on her feet shouting objections, but it was too late. The bomb had been dropped. And you're currently being investigated by the SEC for that very matter, are you not? I pressed on. I exercise my right under the Fifth Amendment, he spat, his face turning purple. Of course you do, I said, turning to the jury with a knowing look. I then projected a series of documents onto the screen. Are these your signatures on the incorporation documents for a shell company in Belize, which owns another in Panama, which in turn owns a server farm in Romania? He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He was trapped. Flores was frantically trying to get him off the stand, but Judge Carmichael was watching him with narrowed, predatory eyes. I'll ask you one more time, Mr. Thorne, I said, my voice ringing through the silent courtroom. Did you or did you not build a secret digital infrastructure for the sole purpose of embezzling $5 million from a charity, and then use that same infrastructure to create a mountain of fake evidence to frame an innocent man for your crimes? He didn't answer. He just sat there sweating under the lights, his arrogance shattered. The truth was hanging in the air, undeniable and suffocating. I turned to the judge. The defense rests, Your Honor. It took the jury less than an hour. The foreman stood up, a middle-aged woman with a stern face, and looked directly at Ethan. On the charge of wire fraud, we the jury find the defendant Ethan Sterling not guilty. A collective gasp, then a sob, erupted from the front row. My mother collapsed into my father's arms, weeping with relief. Ethan just sat there, his head in his hands, shaking. I felt a hand on my arm. It was my co-counsel. You did it, Jordan, he whispered, his voice full of awe. My God, you actually did it. I just nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked over at Maria Flores. She was packing her briefcase, her face a thunderous mask. She caught my eye and gave me a curt, almost imperceptible nod. It was a sign of respect from one warrior to another. Then I looked at the back of the courtroom. 2 federal marshals were quietly approaching Marcus Thorne, who was still sitting in the witness stand, looking like a man who had seen a ghost. His own ghost come back to haunt him. I stood up, gathered my papers and walked over to the defense table. I put a hand on my brother's shaking shoulder. It's over, Ethan, I said softly. You're free. He looked up at me, his eyes swimming with tears. He didn't say thank you. He just looked at me with a profound, overwhelming sense of awe and gratitude that was more eloquent than any words. In that moment I wasn't the shark. I wasn't the black sheep. I was his sister. And I had brought him home. The celebration, if you could call it that, was a quiet, strained affair at my parents' house. The air was no longer thick with pot roast, but with the strange, clean scent of a world that had been scrubbed raw. Ethan, looking thin and tired but undeniably free, was the center of a small circle of relieved friends. My parents, however, orbited the edges of the room, their movements uncertain. They kept looking at me, then looking away as if I were a source of light too bright to behold directly. My father finally approached me as I stood by the fireplace, nursing a glass of water. Jordan, he said, his voice raspy. There are no words. What you did in that courtroom, it was brilliant. It was my job, I said simply without malice. No, he said, shaking his head. It was more than that. We saw the work, the fight in you. We never saw it before. We never wanted to. My mother joined him, her face a mess of tear-streaked relief and dawning shame. He's right, dear. We were blind. So proud of our own narrow little view of what it meant to be good, we couldn't see the goodness right in front of us. Your strength. Your mind. We belittled it because we didn't understand it. Because it scared us. It was the most honest thing either of them had ever said to me. It was the beginning of an apology, but it wasn't the one we had agreed upon. A week later I received a draft. It was a single typed page sent by email from my father. It was stilted and formal, full of phrases like, "We regret if our actions were misconstrued," and "We have always been proud of both our children in their different ways." It was a masterpiece of non-apology, a document designed to fulfill the letter of our agreement while completely violating its spirit. It was an apology written by people who were still, on some level, trying to save face. I picked up the phone and called my father. "I read your draft," I said, my voice cold. "And?" he asked, a hopeful note in his voice. "And it's garbage. You will not write, 'We regret if Jordan felt hurt.' That language places the blame on my feelings, not on your actions. You will write, 'We hurt Jordan through our words and actions.' You will not write, 'We are proud in different ways.' You will write, 'We wrongly devalued Jordan's path while excessively praising her brothers.' I am not asking for polite sentiment. I am asking for a full and honest accounting. Try again." I hung up. The ensuing argument lasted 2 days. They called me, shouting, pleading. They accused me again of being cruel, of extracting my pound of flesh. "This isn't about punishment." I finally yelled into the phone, my own composure cracking for the first time since the ordeal began. "This is about truth. You sat in that courtroom and you saw what I do. You saw the skill and the passion and the sheer force of will it takes. You saw me save your son's life with the very tools you condemned. This apology is not for me. It's for you. It's a chance for you to finally, after 34 years, see your daughter clearly. If you can't do that, then we have nothing more to say to each other, and you can consider my services rendered pro bono, as a final gift to a family I no longer wish to be a part of." The threat and the pain behind it finally broke through their pride. The second draft arrived the next day. It was raw. It was painful. It was honest. It detailed their favoritism, their dismissive language, their willful blindness. It acknowledged the years of hurt. It was everything I had asked for. Ethan's portion was appended at the end, a simple, heartfelt paragraph about his own complicity and his profound, newfound respect for the sister who had saved him. They signed it. All 3 of them. The following Sunday it appeared. A full page in the city paper's opinion section. A public apology to our daughter, Jordan Sterling. My name in a bold headline. It was stark, shocking, and deeply, deeply personal. My phone started ringing off the hook. Friends, colleagues, even opposing counsel, all calling to express a mixture of shock, confusion, and a strange, quiet admiration. I didn't answer any of them. I sat in my office, the newspaper spread out on my desk, and I read the words over and over. I had expected to feel a surge of triumph, a rush of vindication. But the feeling was quieter, more complex. It wasn't the thrill of victory. It was the calm of a debt finally being paid. It was the closing of a painful chapter. The words on the page didn't magically heal 2 decades of wounds. But they acknowledged that the wounds were real. And for the first time I felt seen. Truly seen, not as the shark or the black sheep or the disappointing daughter, but as Jordan. The apology wasn't the victory. The victory was that I no longer needed it. But in getting it, I had forced them to confront the truth, and in doing so had set us all in a strange way free. A year passed. Life settled into a new, unfamiliar shape. The apology was a seismic event that had permanently altered our family's landscape. The old dynamics were gone, shattered beyond repair. In their place, something new and tentative began to grow. The conversations with my parents were still awkward, punctuated by long silences, but the silences were no longer filled with unspoken judgment. They were filled with a kind of cautious, respectful space. They started asking about my cases not with criticism but with a genuine, if hesitant, curiosity. They were trying. My relationship with Ethan underwent the most profound change. The pedestal he had been on his entire life had crumbled, and he seemed relieved to be on solid ground. He was rebuilding Harvest for hope from the ashes, this time with a board of directors that had been vetted by me, and with financial controls that were ironclad. He was more humble, more thoughtful, and infinitely more aware. He called me once a week just to talk. Not as the golden child talking to the outcast, but as a brother talking to his sister. We talked about his work, my work, about movies, about the weather. We talked like equals. One crisp autumn afternoon he met me for coffee at a small cafe near my office. He looked healthier, the shadows gone from his eyes. "You know," he said, stirring his latte, "the craziest thing is, in a way, Marcus Thorne did me a favor." I raised an eyebrow. "That's a generous way of putting it." "No, I'm serious," he said. "Getting arrested, going through all that, it was like a forest fire. Destroyed everything. But it also cleared out all the dead wood. Made me see everything clearly for the first time. It made me see you clearly. He looked at me, his gaze direct and sincere. I spent my whole life being the good son. I never realized that being good was easy when everyone is constantly telling you that you are. You were the one who had to be strong. You had to build your own worth from scratch while they were busy trying to tear it down. I'm so sorry, Jordy. For my part in it. It's in the past, Ethan, I said, and for the first time it felt true. I know. But I need you to know that I see you now. I really see you. We sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, the unspoken apology from a year ago hanging between us, not as a source of tension, but as the foundation of our new relationship. It had been the price of admission to this new, more honest world. Later that week, a young, terrified law student I was mentoring through a firm program came to my office, on the verge of quitting. Her family, blue-collar workers from a small town, thought her ambition to be a corporate lawyer was a betrayal of her roots. They called her greedy, told her she was forgetting where she came from. She was crying, convinced they were right. I listened patiently and then I told her my story. Not all of it, but enough. I told her that her value was not determined by the opinions of others, even those she loved. I told her that ambition was not a sin and that her drive was a gift. I told her that sometimes, the people who are supposed to build you up become the biggest obstacles you have to overcome, and that overcoming them is a victory in itself. She left my office that day with her shoulders back and a new light in her eyes. And in that moment I understood the true meaning of what had happened. The apology from my family was a closed loop, a personal reckoning. But the strength I had forged in the face of their disapproval, that was something I could give away. It was a power I could use not just to win cases, but to help others find their own strength. My parents had wanted a daughter who built things. In the end, in my own way, I had built a life they couldn't diminish, a career they had to respect, and a sense of self-worth that was finally and truly my own. Looking back on it all, the lesson I carry with me is that your worth is not a reflection in someone else's mirror. For years I let my family define me by what I wasn't, and I fought to be seen. But the real turning point wasn't the trial or even the apology. It was the moment I realized that their validation was a cage and I had been holding the key the entire time. The most important verdict is the one you deliver for yourself. I'd love to hear from you all in the comments. Have you ever had to fight to be seen for who you really are by the people closest to you? Share your story below because every voice matters. Don't forget to like this video if my journey resonated with you, and please subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the most unexpected places. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it gives you strength, and I want you to remember that family is ultimately defined by love and respect, not just by blood.